The winter wind howled through the narrow streets of Red River, New Mexico, carrying with it the kind of cold that settled into your bones and refused to leave. And Zara Voss had never felt more terrified in her entire 20 years of life, as she did standing on the worn wooden porch of the rough-hewn cabin, her thin shawl doing nothing to keep out the bitter December chill of 1878. Her father had vanished 3 days ago, leaving behind only a note that said he was sorry, that he had no choice, and that she would understand when the man came to collect. She had not understood then, huddled in their tiny rented room above the general store, and she understood even less now as the stranger who had appeared at dawn led her through the snow-dusted streets to this place at the edge of town where the pines grew thick and the mountains loomed like silent sentinels. The man who had fetched her was a banker's clerk, thin-lipped and cold-eyed, carrying a leather portfolio that he clutched to his chest, as though it contained all the secrets of the world. He had explained nothing during their walk, only told her to come along, that her father's debts had come due and arrangements had been made. When they reached the cabin, he knocked twice, then stepped back as the door swung open to reveal a man who looked nothing like what Zara had expected. Ryland Everett stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and lean-waisted, with dark hair that fell nearly to his collar, and eyes the color of storm clouds over the Sangre de Cristo range. He wore a faded blue shirt rolled to his elbows despite the cold, and his hands were calloused from years of working cattle and breaking horses. He looked at Zara with an expression she could not quite read, something between surprise and anger, then turned his attention to the clerk. "This is her." His voice was deep, rough around the edges like whiskey over gravel. "This is Zara Voss, daughter of Martin Voss, as specified in the agreement." The clerk pulled papers from his portfolio, shuffling through them with practiced efficiency. The debt was $300, owed for 6 months with interest compounding monthly. The total came to $417. As Mr. Voss was unable to pay, he signed over guardianship of his daughter in exchange for forgiveness of said debt. All legal and binding, witnessed by Judge Hartwell himself. Zara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "He sold me." Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper, but both men heard it clearly. Ryland's jaw tightened. He reached for the papers, scanning them quickly, his expression growing darker with each line he read. When he finished, he looked at Zara again, really looked at her this time, taking in her threadbare dress, her worn boots, the way she trembled in the cold. Her hair was the color of honey shot through with gold, falling in loose waves past her shoulders, and her eyes were the deep green of summer grass. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache, but more than that, she looked lost and scared and heartbreakingly young. "How old are you?" he asked quietly. 20. She lifted her chin, trying for defiance even as tears threatened to spill over. "Old enough to know my father is a coward and a fool." "Old enough," Ryland agreed. He turned back to the clerk, holding the papers out. "Tell the bank this arrangement is declined." The clerk blinked. "I beg your pardon, you heard me. The debt was mine to collect, and I am choosing not to collect it this way." Ryland's voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Martin Voss can work off what he owes like any other man." "Mr. Everett, with all respect, the papers are signed and legally binding. The debt has been satisfied according to the terms Mr. Voss agreed to. If you refuse to accept the terms, the debt becomes yours to pay in full, and the young woman's guardianship reverts to the bank as collateral." Ryland was silent for a long moment, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Zara watched him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She had heard of men buying wives or indenturing servants, had even known a girl back east who had been sent west as a mail-order bride, but she had never imagined her own father would trade her away like property. The shame of it burned almost as hot as her fear of what would happen next. Finally, Ryland spoke. How much to pay the debt outright and void the guardianship clause? The clerk consulted his papers. $417 plus a processing fee of $20 for the paperwork. $437 total. I do not have that much in cash. Ryland ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. I can pay $200 now and the rest by spring when I sell my horses. I am afraid the bank requires payment in full to void the agreement, Mr. Everett. However, as I said, the debt is already considered satisfied. Miss Voss is legally under your guardianship now. What you choose to do with that guardianship is, of course, your business. The clerk tucked the papers back into his portfolio, clearly eager to be done with the whole affair. If there is nothing else, I will bid you both good day. Ryland caught the clerk's arm as he turned to leave. The original papers, all of them. Mr. Everett, I must keep copies for the bank's records. The originals, Ryland repeated, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Now. Perhaps it was the look in his eyes or the way his hand tightened on the clerk's arm, but the man quickly produced the documents and handed them over. Ryland released him, and the clerk hurried away through the snow without a backward glance, his boots crunching on the frozen ground until the sound faded into the whisper of wind through the pines. When they were alone, Ryland looked down at the papers in his hand. The agreement was there in black and white, signed by Martin Voss and witnessed by the judge, transferring guardianship of his daughter to Ryland Everett in exchange for debt forgiveness. It was the most callous thing Ryland had ever seen, and he had seen plenty in his 32 years on this earth. He had come west after the war, looking to leave behind the memories of blood and death, and had built a life here in the mountains raising horses and running cattle. He had lent money to Martin Voss last spring when the man claimed he needed it to invest in a silver mine that would make them both rich. The mine had been a fraud, the money gone, and Voss had spent the summer avoiding Ryland and making excuses. But this was beyond anything Ryland had imagined the man capable of. Without a word, he walked to the porch railing and tore the papers in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter down into the snow like strange geometric snowflakes. Zara gasped. "What are you doing?" Making a choice. Ryland turned to face her, his expression serious. "Your father is a fool and what he did is unforgivable, but I am not a man who deals in human lives. Those papers said you belonged to me. Well, I just made it clear that is not how this works. But the debt is between your father and me. It has nothing to do with you." He paused, studying her. "Do you have anywhere to go, family, friends who would take you in?" Zara shook her head slowly. "My mother died when I was 15. We came out here from Missouri 2 years ago. My father said we would make our fortune." She laughed bitterly. "Instead, he made debts and broke promises. I have no one. Then I am asking you, as a free woman with a choice, if you would be willing to stay here temporarily. I have a spare room. You can work for your keep if that sits better with your pride. Cooking, mending, whatever needs doing. In exchange, you will have a roof over your head and food in your belly until you decide what you want to do with your life. No obligations beyond honest work for honest pay." She stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception or hidden intent. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Ryland said simply, "and because I remember what it is like to have nowhere to go and no one to turn to. I was 17 when I lied about my age and joined the Union Army. When the war ended, I had no home to return to, no family waiting. I drifted for years before I found this place. So yes, I know what it is like to be alone. And I would not wish that on anyone, least of all a young woman whose only crime was having a father who valued his own skin more than his daughter's welfare. The tears Zara had been holding back finally spilled over, running hot tracks down her cold cheeks. She wanted to be strong, to face this disaster with her head held high, but the kindness in this stranger's voice broke something inside her. She had been so scared, so certain that she was about to be forced into a life of servitude or worse, and here was this man tearing up the very papers that bound her to him and offering her freedom instead. "I do not know how to repay you," she whispered. "Then do not try. Just say yes or no. The choice is yours, Zara. It will always be yours." She looked at the cabin behind him, small but sturdy, smoke rising from the chimney promising warmth inside. She looked at the torn papers scattered in the snow, already being buried by fresh flakes that had begun to fall. She looked at Ryland Everett, this cowboy with storm-cloud eyes who had just given her back something she thought she had lost forever, the ability to choose her own path. "Yes," she said, "I will stay, and I will work. You will not regret this kindness." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Come inside before you freeze. We can sort out the details where it is warm." The cabin was small but well kept, with a main room that served as kitchen and sitting area, a bedroom on one side, and a smaller room on the other that Ryland explained he had been using for storage. He helped her clear it out, moving saddles and tack and boxes of supplies to the barn behind the house, revealing a narrow bed with a straw mattress and a small window that looked out on the pines. It was sparse, but it was hers, and that made it more than Zara had dared hope for an hour ago. Ryland left her to settle in while he tended to his horses, and Zara took the opportunity to look around the main cabin. It was clearly the home of a man who lived alone, functional but lacking the small touches that made a house feel lived in. The dishes were clean but mismatched, stacked on shelves beside the cast iron stove. The furniture was rough-hewn but solid, built to last. A rifle hung over the door, and a gun belt was draped over a chair, the holster worn smooth with use. It was the home of a man who worked hard and expected little from life beyond what he could earn with his own two hands. When Ryland returned, stamping snow from his boots, he found Zara standing by the stove, looking uncertain. "I should start earning my keep," she said. "But I do not know what you need or where anything is kept. Right now, I need coffee, and I imagine you could use something hot as well." He moved past her to the stove, stoking the fire and setting a battered pot of water to boil. "As for the rest, we will figure it out as we go. I am not a demanding man, Zara. I keep odd hours depending on the horses and cattle. I do my own cooking, such as it is, though I will not pretend I am good at it. I can manage biscuits and beans and not much else. If you have skills beyond that, I would be grateful. If not, we will muddle through together." She watched him move around the kitchen with easy familiarity, pulling down a tin of coffee, measuring it into the pot. His hands were large and capable, scarred from years of hard work. "I can cook," she said quietly. "My mother taught me before she passed. And I can sew, mend clothing, tend a garden in spring. I am not useless." He glanced at her, and this time his smile was fuller, reaching his eyes. "I never thought you were, but you have had a hell of a morning, and I imagine the last thing you feel like doing is proving your worth to a stranger. So drink coffee, warm up, and we will talk about everything else later." They sat at the rough wooden table, cups of strong black coffee warming their hands, and for a while neither spoke. Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside, the fire crackled and the cabin slowly filled with warmth. Zara found herself studying Ryland when she thought he was not looking, trying to understand this man who had torn up legal papers and offered her freedom without expecting anything in return. "Why did you lend my father money?" she asked finally. Ryland was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "He came to me last April, said he had a chance to invest in a silver mine up north, that it was a sure thing. He needed 300 to buy in, and he would pay me back double within 6 months. I had been having a good year, and I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to believe him. I have been alone out here for a long time, and your father had a way of making you feel like a friend, like you were part of something bigger." He shook his head. "I should have known better. There are no sure things in this life." "He has always been like that," Zara said softly. "Full of big dreams and promises. My mother believed him every time, right up until the day she died. He promised her we would strike it rich, that we would go back east and live in a fine house. Instead, she died in a rented room over a general store, worn out from years of following him from one failed scheme to another. I am sorry. So am I." She took a sip of coffee, letting the bitter warmth spread through her. "What will you do about the money?" "He still owes you, even without the papers. I will find him and we will come to an arrangement. He can work it off one way or another, but that is between him and me. It is not your burden to carry. He is my father. How can it not be my burden?" Ryland reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. "Because you did not make his choices, Zara. He did, and he will answer for them. But you are your own person, not his property or his penance. The sooner you understand that, the sooner you can start building a life that is yours alone." She looked at his hand, so close to hers, then up at his face. There was no pity in his eyes, only understanding and a quiet strength that made her want to believe him. "I do not know how to do that," she admitted. "I have spent my whole life following him, cleaning up his messes, trying to make things work. I do not know who I am without that. Then you will figure it out, and you will do it here where you are safe and free to make your own choices." He pulled his hand back, taking another drink of coffee. "For what it is worth, I think you are stronger than you know. It takes courage to accept help when you need it, and even more courage to trust a stranger. You have both." The compliment warmed her more than the coffee or the fire. She found herself smiling just a little, the first genuine smile since her father had disappeared. "Thank you, Ryland, for everything. You are welcome. Now, let me show you where things are, and you can decide what you would like to do with your afternoon. I need to ride out and check on the herd, make sure they have shelter from this storm. I should be back by dusk." He showed her the larder, which held supplies enough for a month or more, explained the workings of the stove, and pointed out the well behind the cabin where she could draw water. Then he bundled himself in a heavy coat and wide-brimmed hat, strapped on his gun belt, and headed out into the snow, leaving Zara alone in his cabin. She stood at the window, watching him disappear into the white, and felt the strangest sensation in her chest. It was not quite hope, not yet, but it was close. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she felt like she could breathe, like the weight of her father's failures was not crushing her down. This cowboy, this Ryland Everett, had given her that gift with nothing more than torn papers and kind words. She would not waste it. By the time Ryland returned that evening, tired and half frozen, the cabin had been transformed. The dishes were washed and properly organized. The floor had been swept. A pot of stew bubbled on the stove, filling the air with the rich scent of meat and vegetables. The table was set for two, and Zara stood by the stove, her cheeks flushed from the heat, looking almost shy. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "I found ingredients in the larder, and I wanted to make myself useful." Ryland pulled off his hat, staring around the cabin in something like wonder. "Mind? Zara, this is more than I could have hoped for. It smells incredible. It is just stew, nothing fancy. It is a damn sight better than the beans I would have made. He shrugged out of his coat, hanging it by the door, and moved to the stove to warm his hands. The herd is secure. They have shelter in the North Canyon, and there is enough grass under the snow to keep them fed. The horses are all accounted for as well. It should be a quiet few days while this storm blows through. They ate together at the table, and Ryland discovered that Zara had not been exaggerating her skills. The stew was rich and flavorful, the biscuits she had made light and flaky. They talked while they ate, tentative at first but gradually more comfortable. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother's love of music and her father's restless spirit. He told her about the war, though he kept the worst of it to himself, and about coming west with nothing but the clothes on his back and a determination to build something that mattered. "Why horses?" she asked. "You said you raise horses. Because they are honest. A horse does not lie or make promises it cannot keep. If you treat them well, they will give you everything they have, and there is always demand for good horses out here. The ranches need them, the cavalry needs them, even the mines need them to haul ore. It is hard work, but it is mine and I am proud of it. I would like to see them sometime if you would allow it. Of course. When the storm clears, I will introduce you properly. I have 6 broodmares, 2 stallions, and a dozen youngsters in various stages of training. Plus the cattle, but they are more for subsistence than profit. I am no cattleman, but a man has to eat." She smiled at that, and he found himself smiling back, surprised at how easy it was to talk to her. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to share space with another person, to have someone to talk to at the end of a long day. It felt good. It felt right in a way he had not expected. The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. The storm lasted 3 more days, dumping snow until the drifts reached halfway up the cabin walls. They were snowed in together, but it was not the uncomfortable situation Ryland had feared. Zara worked hard, keeping the cabin clean and cooking meals that made his eyes roll back with pleasure. In return, he taught her things about the land, about reading weather and understanding animals, about surviving in a place that could be as harsh as it was beautiful. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories and dreams. Zara spoke of wanting to open a restaurant someday, a place where people could come for good food and warm company. Ryland talked about expanding his horse operation, maybe breeding for the cavalry market where the money was better. They played cards with a worn deck Ryland pulled from a drawer, and he laughed when she beat him 3 hands in a row. "Your mother taught you to play?" he asked, shuffling the deck for another round. "My father, actually. One of the few useful things he ever gave me." She watched him deal, her expression thoughtful. "He was not always bad, you know. When I was little, he was fun and exciting. He would come home with gifts and stories, and my mother would light up like the sun. But somewhere along the way, the dreams got bigger and the failures got worse, and he started looking for easier ways to make money. That is when everything fell apart." "Do you miss him?" She considered the question. "I miss who he used to be, or maybe who I thought he was. But the man who signed those papers? No, I do not miss him at all. That is understandable." Ryland laid down his cards. "When the weather clears, I will go into town and find him. He needs to know you are safe, even if he does not deserve to know." "And then what?" "Then he and I will settle accounts. He can work off the debt or leave town. Those are his choices." Zara nodded slowly. She did not ask to go with him, and he did not offer. Some conversations were better had without an audience, especially when they involved disappointing fathers and unpaid debts. When the storm finally broke on the 4th day, the world outside was transformed. The snow lay 3 feet deep in places, pristine and glittering under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Ryland bundled up and went to check on the animals, and this time Zara came with him, wrapped in a spare coat of his that hung nearly to her knees. The barn was warm with the heat of the horses, and Zara gasped with delight when she saw them. There were 8 in the barn, the rest having been turned out to the canyon where they could move freely. Ryland introduced her to each one, telling her their names and personalities. There was Thunder, a big gray stallion with a temperamental streak; Whiskey, a gentle sorrel mare who nuzzled Zara's hand looking for treats; Dancing Girl, a young bay filly who pranced and tossed her head; and others, each with their own character. "They are beautiful," Zara breathed, stroking Whiskey's soft nose. "I have never been around horses much. My father was afraid of them. They can sense fear. That is probably why he never got along with them." Ryland moved down the line, checking each horse, running his hands over legs and backs looking for any problems. "But they respond well to confidence and kindness. You treat them with respect, they will return it tenfold." He spent the next hour teaching her the basics of horse care, showing her how to brush them properly, how to check their hooves for stones or damage, how to read their body language. Zara proved an eager student, asking questions and following his instructions carefully. By the time they finished, her cheeks were flushed with cold and exertion, and her eyes were bright with happiness. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said as they walked back to the cabin through the snow. "I know I am just here temporarily, but it means a lot that you would take the time to teach me." Ryland glanced at her, something tightening in his chest at the reminder that this arrangement was temporary. In just a few days, he had grown accustomed to her presence, to the sound of her voice and the sight of her moving around his cabin, making it feel like a home. The thought of her leaving, of going back to the empty silence, was unexpectedly painful. "You are not just here temporarily unless you want to be," he said carefully. "I meant what I said before. You can stay as long as you need. There is no rush to figure out what comes next." She looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face. "Why are you so kind to me? You barely know me." "Maybe that is why. I do not know your faults yet, so I can only see the good." He smiled to soften the words. "Or maybe I am just tired of eating my own terrible cooking." She laughed, a sound like bells in the cold air, and something in Ryland's heart shifted. He realized with a jolt that he was starting to care for this woman, this Zara who had come to him through no choice of her own, and had somehow fit herself into his life as though she had always belonged there. It was too soon, too fast, but feelings did not follow schedules or logic. They simply were. They spent the rest of the day working together, Ryland splitting wood while Zara prepared meals and mended a shirt of his that had torn at the shoulder. In the evening, they sat by the fire again, and Ryland found himself telling her things he had never told anyone else. About the nightmares that still woke him some nights, echoes of the war. About the loneliness that had driven him to lend money to Martin Voss despite his better judgment, simply because he wanted to believe in human connection again. About the fear that he would spend his entire life alone because he did not know how to let people in. Zara listened without judgment, her eyes soft with understanding. When he finished, she reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. Her fingers were small and warm in his, and the simple touch sent electricity racing up his arm. "You are not alone anymore," she said quietly. "Not as long as I am here, and I think you are braver than you give yourself credit for. It takes courage to admit fear, and even more courage to keep going despite it." He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "You have courage too, more than you realize." They sat like that for a long time, hands joined, watching the fire burn down to embers. Neither wanted to break the connection, this fragile thing that was forming between them. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could become love if they were brave enough to let it. The next morning, Ryland saddled Thunder and rode into Red River to find Martin Voss. The town was busy despite the snow, people digging out from the storm and going about their business. He found Voss in the last place he looked, the saloon, hunched over a whiskey at a back table like a man trying to disappear into the shadows. Ryland walked up to the table and sat down without invitation. Voss looked up, his face going pale when he recognized him. "Ryland, I can explain." "No." Ryland's voice was cold, harder than Voss had ever heard it. "You will not explain, you will listen. You signed papers giving me guardianship of your daughter to settle a debt. Do you have any idea how despicable that is? I had no choice. The bank was going to take everything, throw me in jail. I thought you would treat her well. I thought it would be better than what? Better than you being a man and facing the consequences of your own actions." Ryland leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "Zara is 20 years old. She deserves a life of her own, not to be traded like property to cover your debts. Where is she? Is she all right?" For the first time, something like genuine concern crossed Voss's face. "She is safe. She is staying in my cabin, working for her keep as a free woman, not as payment for your mistakes. I tore up the papers, Martin. The guardianship is void. But the debt is still yours. And you will work it off one way or another. I am giving you a choice. You can come work for me, and I will pay you fair wages that will go toward what you owe. It will take time, maybe a year or more, but it is honest work and you will clear your name. Or you can leave town and never come back. If you choose that, the debt dies with your departure, but so does any claim you have to your daughter. You will not contact her, you will not try to see her, you will simply disappear from her life as though you never existed." Voss sat back, his face crumbling. "She is my daughter." "Then act like it. Be a man she can be proud of instead of one she has to make excuses for." Ryland stood, looking down at the broken man before him. "You have until tomorrow to decide. If you want to work, meet me at my place at dawn. If you do not show, I will take that as your answer, and you had better be gone from Red River by the time I come looking for you again." He left Voss sitting there and walked out into the cold morning, his anger burning hot despite the winter air. He hated men like Martin Voss, men who took the easy way out and left others to clean up their messes. But he had made his offer, and now it was up to Voss to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. When he got back to the cabin, Zara was in the kitchen making bread, her hands dusted with flour. She looked up when he entered, her expression anxious. "Did you find him?" "I did." Ryland hung up his coat and moved to the stove, warming his hands. "I gave him two choices. He can work for me and pay off the debt honestly, or he can leave town and never contact you again. He has until tomorrow to decide. What do you think he will choose?" "I do not know. I hope he chooses to stay and make things right, for your sake if not for his, but I will not hold my breath. Men like your father do not often change." Zara nodded slowly, turning back to her bread dough. Her hands moved mechanically, kneading and shaping, but Ryland could see the tension in her shoulders. He moved behind her, his hands hovering near her arms, then gently settling on her shoulders. "Whatever he decides, you will be all right," he said softly. "I promise you that." She leaned back into his touch, just slightly, and he felt the tremor that ran through her. "I know. It is just hard. Part of me wants him to stay and prove that he can be better. But another part of me wants him gone so I can stop hoping he will change and just accept who he is." Both feelings are valid. His thumbs moved in small circles on her shoulders, trying to ease the tension. There is no wrong way to feel about this. She turned then, stepping into the circle of his arms and pressed her face against his chest. Ryland wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his own. They stood like that for a long moment, finding comfort in each other's presence, and Ryland realized with absolute certainty that he was falling in love with this woman. It was too soon. They barely knew each other, but the heart did not care about logic or timing. It simply knew what it knew, and his heart knew that Zara Voss was someone he could love for the rest of his life if she would let him. But he said nothing. It was too soon to burden her with his feelings when she was still dealing with the aftermath of her father's betrayal. Instead, he just held her and let his actions speak for him, hoping she could feel in his embrace what he could not yet say with words. Martin Voss did not appear at dawn the next morning. Ryland waited an hour past sunrise, then rode back into town to find that Voss had left on the evening stage, heading west with nothing but the clothes on his back. The saloon keeper said he had seemed relieved, like a weight had been lifted. He had not left any message for his daughter. Ryland sat on Thunder in the middle of the snow-covered street, staring at the empty space where the stage had departed, and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that Voss was gone and would no longer be a problem. Anger that the man had chosen the coward's way out yet again. And sadness for Zara, who would have to live with the knowledge that her father had chosen flight over facing his responsibilities. He rode back to the cabin slowly, rehearsing different ways to break the news, but when he arrived, Zara took one look at his face and knew. He left, she said. It was not a question. Last night. On the westbound stage. I am sorry, Zara. She nodded, her face carefully neutral. I knew he would. Deep down, I knew. He has been running his whole life. I do not know why I thought this time would be different. Ryland dismounted and went to her, taking her hands in his. It is his loss. He is losing the chance to know the remarkable woman you are becoming. And he is losing the chance to be better. That is on him, not you. I know, it still hurts though. It should hurt. He is your father and he failed you. You are allowed to grieve that even if you are also relieved. Feelings are complicated. They do not have to make sense. She looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes but not falling. What happens now? Now you decide what you want. You are free, Zara. Truly free. Your father is gone, the debt is settled as far as I am concerned, and you have your whole life ahead of you. You can stay here as long as you want. You can go anywhere you want. The choice is entirely yours. What if I do not know what I want? Then you stay until you figure it out. There is no rush. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. I like having you here, Zara, more than I should probably admit. But I will not trap you here with obligation or guilt. You deserve the freedom to choose your own path, wherever that leads. She studied his face, seeing the honesty there, the care that he did not try to hide. I like being here too, she said softly. I like the work, I like the horses. I like the quiet and the mountains and the way the world feels clean after a snowfall. And I like you, Ryland Everett. I like you more than is probably wise considering we have only known each other a week. His heart stuttered in his chest. There is no timeline on feelings. They come when they come. Is that your way of saying you feel something too? He could have deflected, could have kept things safe and undefined. But Ryland Everett had never been a coward and he would not start now. Yes, I feel something too, something strong and real and terrifying. I look at you and I see a future I did not think I could have, but I do not want to rush you or pressure you. You have been through enough. Zara stepped closer, rising on her toes to bring her face level with his. What if I do not want to wait? What if I want to embrace this feeling and see where it leads? Then I would say you are the bravest woman I have ever met. His hands came up to cradle her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones, and I would ask if I could kiss you. Yes, she whispered. Please, yes. He kissed her then, soft and careful, a question more than a demand. She answered by pressing closer, her hands fisting in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and need and the promise of more. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryland rested his forehead against hers. I am going to fall in love with you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I think I am already halfway there. Then I will meet you on the other side, she replied, her smile radiant despite the tears that finally spilled over. Because I am falling too, and I am not scared anymore. They stood in the snow outside the cabin, holding each other as the winter sun climbed higher and everything felt possible. The pain of the past week was still there, but it was receding, making room for something new and bright and full of hope. The winter passed in a blur of work and growing affection. Ryland taught Zara everything he knew about horses and ranching, and she proved an apt pupil with a natural gift for understanding animals. She worked alongside him every day, mucking stalls and hauling feed, learning to ride and rope and all the 100 small skills that made up life on a ranch. In the evenings, they talked and laughed and slowly built a foundation of trust and understanding. They kissed often, stolen moments of tenderness that left them both wanting more but also content to take their time. Ryland was determined not to rush her, to give her space to heal and grow into her own person. Zara appreciated his restraint even as she chafed at it, wanting more but understanding that some things were worth the wait. By March, the snow was melting and the first hints of green were appearing on the mountainsides. Ryland's mares were heavy with foals, and he spent long hours in the barn, monitoring them for signs of labor. Zara was there for every birth, watching in awe as new life entered the world, helping Ryland guide the process when needed. The first foal was born on a cold March night, a leggy bay colt who stood on wobbly legs within an hour of birth. Zara laughed with delight when he took his first stumbling steps, and Ryland looked at her watching the foal with such joy and thought his heart might burst. "What do you want to name him?" he asked. "Me. But he is yours. He is ours. If you are going to help raise him, you should help name him." The word ours hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning beyond just a foal. Zara considered, watching the colt nurse from his mother. "Promise," she said finally. "I want to name him Promise, because he represents the future and the promise of good things to come. Promise it is." Ryland pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I like it. It suits him." Over the next few weeks, 4 more foals were born, and the ranch felt alive in a way it never had when Ryland worked it alone. Having Zara there, sharing the work and the joy, made everything better. They fell into an easy partnership, anticipating each other's needs, working together like they had been doing it for years instead of months. In April, the first traveling preacher of the season came through Red River, and Ryland rode into town with a question burning in his mind. When he returned that evening, he found Zara in the garden she had planted, carefully tending the early sprouts. "Zara, can we talk?" Something in his tone made her look up sharply. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine. Better than fine." He dismounted and came to her, taking her hands and pulling her to her feet. "I have been thinking. We have been living together for months now, and while I know we started under unusual circumstances, this has become something real, something important, and I find myself wanting to make it official." Her breath caught. "Ryland, what are you saying?" He dropped to one knee in the soft dirt of her garden, still holding her hands. "I am saying I love you, Zara Voss. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum while you cook. I love how you are not afraid to get dirty or work hard. I love the sound of your laugh and the way your eyes light up when you see the horses. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life loving you if you will let me. Marry me, Zara, not because of debt or obligation or anything other than the fact that I choose you. I choose you every day, and I want to keep choosing you for the rest of our lives. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling, her whole face radiant with joy. Yes, yes, Ryland, I will marry you. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. You gave me back my life, and then you gave me a reason to live it fully. There is nothing I want more than to be your wife. He surged to his feet, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. When he set her down, he kissed her with all the pent-up emotion of months of waiting, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. "When?" she asked when they finally broke apart. "When can we do this? There is a preacher in town right now. He is only staying a few days before moving on. We could do it this Sunday if you want, or we could wait, have something bigger." "Sunday," she said without hesitation. "I do not need something big, I just need you." They were married 4 days later in the small church at the edge of Red River, with a handful of townspeople as witnesses. Zara wore a simple blue dress she had made herself from fabric Ryland bought her in town, and he wore his best shirt and vest, his hair slicked back and his face nervous. When the preacher asked if he would take Zara as his wife, his voice was steady and sure. "I will, now and always." When it was her turn, Zara looked into his storm-cloud eyes and felt the rightness of this moment settle into her bones. "I will, today and every day after." They sealed it with a kiss that made the preacher cough and the witnesses chuckle, and walked out of that church as husband and wife, ready to face whatever came next together. The first year of their marriage was everything Ryland had dreamed and more. Zara transformed the cabin into a real home, adding curtains and rugs and the small touches that made it feel lived in and loved. She planted a bigger garden and put up preserves for the winter. She learned to ride as well as Ryland, accompanying him on long trips into the mountains to check on the cattle and horses. They worked side by side every day and fell into bed exhausted every night, wrapped in each other's arms. The horse operation grew as Ryland's reputation for quality stock spread. He sold 6 yearlings to the cavalry that first summer, bringing in enough money to buy more brood mares and expand the barn. Zara proved to have a gift for gentling the young horses, able to calm even the most skittish with patience and soft words. Together, they built something that was truly theirs, a partnership in every sense of the word. In the winter of 1879, Zara discovered she was pregnant. She told Ryland one evening after dinner, watching nervously for his reaction. His face went through a series of emotions: shock, fear, and then pure, unbridled joy. "A baby." His voice was hushed, reverent. "We are going to have a baby, we are. Next summer, if I am calculating correctly." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she squeaked in protest. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents. Zara, this is incredible." "You are happy then?" "Happy. I am terrified and thrilled and more in love with you than I thought possible. This is everything I never knew I wanted." Their son was born on a hot July day in 1880, squalling and red-faced and perfect. They named him Thomas, after Ryland's father, who had died when Ryland was young. Zara took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, and Ryland discovered that watching his wife with their child made him fall in love with her all over again, every single day. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Anna, with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. And 2 years after that, another son, Daniel, who was quieter than his siblings but no less loved. The cabin that had once housed a lonely cowboy now rang with the sound of children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Through it all, Ryland and Zara remained each other's anchors. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, about money and decisions and how to raise the children. But they always came back together, remembering the foundation they had built in that first winter when everything was uncertain and all they had was each other. On their 10th anniversary, Ryland took Zara up into the mountains to a meadow he had discovered years ago, a place where wildflowers grew thick and the view stretched for miles. They left the children with a neighbor and spent the day alone, talking and laughing and making love under the summer sky like newlyweds. "You ever regret it?" Ryland asked as they lay in the grass afterward, Zara's head pillowed on his chest. "Staying here, marrying me, building this life?" "Never, not for a single moment." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a family, a purpose. I was so lost when my father brought me to your door and you gave me the freedom to find myself. How could I ever regret that?" "I feel the same way. You walked into my life and turned everything upside down in the best possible way. I was just existing before you, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again." She leaned down and kissed him, slow and deep. "Then I guess we are both exactly where we are supposed to be, together. Always together." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Thomas grew tall and strong, taking after his father in his love of horses and the land. Anna proved to have her mother's practical nature and her father's quiet strength, managing the household accounts by the time she was 12. Daniel, the youngest, was the dreamer of the family, always asking questions about the world beyond their valley and what lay over the next mountain. Ryland's horse operation became one of the most respected in New Mexico territory. People came from hundreds of miles away to buy his stock, knowing they were getting animals that had been raised with care and trained with patience. Zara's garden expanded until she was selling produce in town, and her cooking became so renowned that people begged her to cater special occasions. They prospered in ways that had nothing to do with money, though they had enough of that too. They prospered in love and family, in the deep satisfaction of work well done, in the knowledge that they had built something lasting and good. When Thomas turned 18, he announced that he wanted to stay and help run the ranch, and Ryland could not have been more proud. When Anna turned 16, she started seeing the son of a neighboring rancher, a kind young man named Henry who treated her with respect and made her laugh. When Daniel was 15, he told them he wanted to go east for school, to learn about engineering and new inventions. And though it pained them to think of him leaving, they supported his dreams. Through all of it, Ryland and Zara remained partners in every way that mattered. They still worked together every day, still fell into bed exhausted every night, still found moments to steal away and remember what it felt like to be just the two of them. The fire that had ignited in that first winter never dimmed. It only grew stronger, fueled by years of shared experiences and deepening love. One evening in the spring of 1895, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Zara reached over and took Ryland's hand. Their hands were older now, marked by age and work, but they fit together as perfectly as they had 17 years ago. "You remember the day we met?" she asked. "When winter brought me to your door as payment for a debt. I remember every detail. You were terrified and trying not to show it. Your shawl was too thin for the cold, and your eyes were the most beautiful green I had ever seen." She smiled. "I remember thinking you were going to be cruel or demanding. Everyone in town said cowboys were hard men with harder hearts, and then you tore up those papers and gave me a choice. You called me your choice, not your obligation. That was the moment everything changed. You were my choice. You are my choice. You will always be my choice, Zara. Every morning when I wake up next to you, I choose you all over again. And I choose you. I will always choose you, Ryland. You are my home, my heart, my everything. He pulled her closer, and she leaned her head on his shoulder, both of them watching as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere behind them in the house, they could hear Thomas and Anna arguing about something, their voices affectionate despite the disagreement. From the barn came the sounds of horses settling for the night. The air smelled of pine and wildflowers and coming summer. This was their life, built from the ashes of debt and desperation into something beautiful and enduring. They had taken the worst moment of Zara's life and transformed it into the foundation of a love that would last their lifetime and beyond. Years later, when their grandchildren asked about how they met, Zara would always smile and tell them the truth. Winter brought her to their grandfather as payment for a debt, she would say, but he tore up the papers and called her his choice instead. And that choice, made on a cold December morning in 1878, was the beginning of everything good in her life. Ryland would add that he was the one who truly benefited from that choice. She had given him a family, a home filled with laughter, and a love that sustained him through every challenge and celebrated every joy. She had taken a lonely cowboy and shown him what it meant to truly live. Their grandchildren would listen wide-eyed, marveling at the romance of it, not understanding until they were older how rare and precious such a love truly was. But Ryland and Zara knew. They had lived it every day for decades, and they would continue living it until their last breath. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch to celebrate. Thomas ran the horse operation now, with his own sons learning the trade. Anna and Henry owned the neighboring ranch, their holdings combined into one of the largest operations in northern New Mexico. Daniel had returned from the East with a degree and a wife, settling in Santa Fe where he worked as an engineer but visited home often. The party lasted all day, filled with food and music and stories. When evening came and most of the guests had departed, leaving only family, Ryland stood and raised his glass. 50 years ago, I was a lonely man who thought I would spend my life alone. Then a winter storm brought me the greatest gift I could have imagined, though it came wrapped in the ugliest package possible. A man I had trusted tried to sell me his daughter to pay his debts. I could have accepted those terms. Instead, I tore up the papers and chose to see Zara as a person, not property, and she chose to stay and build a life with me. Everything good in my life stems from that choice, from her choice to give me a chance and to love me despite my rough edges and soldier's nightmares. Zara, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Here is to 50 more years. Zara stood beside him, tears streaming down her weathered face. 50 more years might be ambitious at our age, she said, making everyone laugh. But I will take whatever time we have left and treasure every moment. Ryland, you saved me in more ways than I can count. You gave me freedom, then you gave me love, then you gave me a family and a purpose. I was lost when winter brought me to your door, but you helped me find myself. I love you more today than I did 50 years ago, and I will love you for whatever time we have remaining. Their family applauded, raising glasses in toast, and Ryland pulled his wife into his arms for a kiss that was still tender and full of promise despite their advanced years. They would have 7 more good years together. 7 more years of watching the sun rise over the mountains and fall asleep in each other's arms. 7 more years of grandchildren running through the house and horses grazing in the pastures. 7 more years of choosing each other, every single day. When Ryland passed peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1936, Zara held his hand, and whispered that she would see him again soon. True to her word, she followed him 6 months later, her heart simply giving out as though it could not bear to beat without him. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that read Ryland Everett, 1846-1936, beloved husband and father, and Zara Everett, 1858-1936, beloved wife and mother. Below that, their children added a final inscription that captured the essence of their love story. Winter brought her as payment for debt. He tore the paper and called her his choice. Together they built a love that conquered all. Their great-grandchildren would visit those graves and ask about the inscription, and the story would be told again. How a young woman came to a cowboy's door on a winter day, bound by papers and debt. How that cowboy chose honor over opportunity, freedom over ownership. How that single choice blossomed into a love story that spanned half a century and touched generations. The ranch would remain in the family for decades more. Everett horses still prized throughout the Southwest. The land still worked by descendants of that original unlikely union. And on winter days when the snow fell thick and the wind howled through the pines, old-timers would swear they could sometimes see two figures walking hand in hand through the pastures, still choosing each other, even beyond death. Because true love, the kind built on respect and freedom and genuine choice, does not end when the body gives out. It lives on in the family created, the land tended, the stories told. Ryland and Zara's love story was written in the bloodlines of horses and children, in the very soil of the ranch they built together. Winter had brought her as payment for debt, but what emerged was so much more than either could have imagined: a partnership, a family, a legacy, and a love that truly did conquer all. Their story became legend in Red River, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from fiction. But the core truth remained unchanged, that sometimes the worst moments of our lives contain the seeds of our greatest joys. That choice and freedom are the foundation of real love. That kindness and honor matter more than legal papers or debt. And that a single decision, made in a moment of moral clarity, can change not just 2 lives but generations to come. The cabin where they first lived together still stood a century later, preserved by the family as a reminder of where it all began. Visitors could see the main room where they ate their first meal together, the small bedroom where Zara slept that first night as a free woman, the porch where Ryland tore up papers that would have bound her to him against her will. It was a shrine not just to their love, but to the values they represented: decency, respect, and the understanding that every person deserves the freedom to choose their own destiny. And on quiet evenings when the tourists had gone, and the sun was setting over the Sangre de Cristo Range, family members who lived on the ranch would sometimes sit on that old porch and feel the presence of their ancestors. They would remember the story of how Winter brought Zara as payment for debt, how Ryland tore the paper and called her his choice, and how that choice echoed down through the ages, shaping all who came after. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West of 1878, tested by hardship and blessed by joy, and ultimately triumphant in ways that transcended time and death. Ryland and Zara Everett had lived their love fully and completely, and in doing so, they created something that would never truly die. As long as the wind blew through Red River and horses ran in the mountain pastures, their story would live on, a testament to the power of choice, the strength of love, and the beauty of 2 souls finding each other against all odds and building something that would last forever.